parked it right next to like a telephone pole, the next morning I would just find it slightly past the telephone pole. I had no real way of tracking what was going on. All I had was my suspicion, and that was it. I was half asleep. I get to the front door and I open it up. I see two NYPD cops, full uniform, standing at my doorstep. So Detective Romano then says, "Mr. Cruz, I'd like you to take a seat." And he pulls out the seat and he goes, "You're gonna want to be sitting down when I tell you this next part."
There is an unwritten code in Brooklyn. You don't tell anyone else's stories, and you don't talk about anyone else's business. Every story I tell is mine. Locations, names, and specific details have all been changed to honor that code. This is Brooklyn Files, the real stories.
Back in the 1980s, Brooklyn car culture was a whole different game from anywhere else in the country. Like, it was its own thing. 1980s Brooklyn car culture wasn't even about speed or muscle like it was everywhere else. It was more about aesthetics and pageantry, believe it or not. So people would like decorate their cars with all kinds of ornate things to get attention and stand out. Like, for example, you had the boomerang antenna, you had the Pierre Cardin style, you had the curb feelers, you had the Landauer roof. Some even had their cars lifted with air shocks and springs, and it was crazy. There was the fancy spoked wheels and white walls, those were cool. Some cars even, believe it or not, had song lyrics painted on the back window in like fancy letters. People would have their favorite songs put on their window. My first car, my 1975 teal-colored Chevy Monte Carlo, that fell into that category. It was nice. But my second car, like, that was a complete disaster. That was the antithesis of that car culture. It was a 1979 Plymouth Horizon. It wasn't a pretty car. It was like this terrible goldish cream color. When I bought that car, I was told that the odometer was broken and that it had 110,000 miles on it. But I would always joke that it seemed like it probably had more like 210,000 miles on it. I mean, I really had no way of knowing the truth. I just rounded up, I guess. And on top of the odometer being broke, the ignition was busted too to boot. So to the point where like you didn't actually need the key to start the car. You could just turn that little knob where the key goes and fidget with that a little bit, and then the car would eventually start. And unfortunately, that car met an untimely demise like a lot of my cars did. And so one night I was driving through my neighborhood in Brooklyn where they were grinding down the street, you know, like how they do before they repave it. And so the manholes were lifted above the ground about 5 inches, and I didn't see them. So me, like an idiot, I drive down the street and bam, like the manhole that was sticking up out of the road took the entire transmission fluid pan beneath the car. And there I was on the side of the road with this gigantic dark pink puddle of fluid on the street. The transmission fluid went everywhere. So I had to write the New York City comptroller after that, a letter to get reimbursed for the damage. And surprisingly, I actually did get a check. It was weird. And that car was done after that, like it never made it back on the road. It was toast. Now rewind approximately 1 year before that. The year was 1991. I had my ugly cream-colored 1979 Plymouth Horizon. And it was getting me everywhere. Like, I actually loved that car because it was surprisingly reliable. Like, it really was. And so I used to park it towards the corner of the street that I lived on. It was a bit of a deserted corner. There wasn't a lot of cars that parked in this section, which was the whole point. So like I would park there because I always found a parking spot there, which was kind of hard to come by everywhere else. So in those days, I got up real early for my job, around 4 a.m. every morning. And when I would get out to the car in the morning, like I always felt like there was something really odd about like where it was parked. It was just something I couldn't explain. I couldn't put my finger on it, but like it always seemed to feel like the car wasn't precisely where I left it the night before. You know what I mean? Like if I parked it right next to like a telephone pole, the next morning I would just find it slightly past the telephone pole. Or if I parked it next to a bunch of garbage cans, I would notice that the cans would be in a different spot relative to where the car was. And I mostly thought I was imagining it. Like, I wasn't really sure if it was happening. I mean, who would like actually want to get in my car and drive it, especially that car? It just was not a looker, you know? And it seemed like an absurd concept, but still, it felt like it was happening. Well, I got to the point where I was starting to get more and more convinced that it was happening. Like, don't forget, this was like well before the days of Wi-Fi and webcams and doorbell cams. Like, I had none of that, so I had no real way of tracking what was going on. All I had was my suspicion, and that was it. It got to the point where one night I couldn't sleep thinking about it. I had this like nagging hunch. So I decided to go outside and take this walk down the street towards the car. And I went about halfway up the block. Then I realized I was being completely absurd, but I almost got near the car. I stopped in my tracks and I went back inside and I went back to bed. And I was like, you're being crazy, man, like stop. But I was becoming a bit obsessed with the idea, if I'm being honest. So like I said, back in those days, I would wake up for work at like 4 a.m. Well, one night, I was startled out of my sleep when I was awakened by not the alarm, but by the doorbell. And I thought I was imagining things. It was around 2:30 a.m. and I'm like, who in the world could be at my front door at this time in the morning? And I was half asleep. I get to the front door and I open it up. I see 2 NYPD cops, full uniform, standing at my doorstep. And I literally thought I was dreaming. So I brushed the sleep from my eyes, and in shock, I look at them, waiting to hear like what they had to say. And one of the cops, he goes, "Hey, are you Jay Cruz?" And I said, "Yeah." And the next thing he said was shocking. He goes, "Go back inside, get dressed. You need to come with us." So these 2 NYPD officers, they're standing at my doorstep. It's 2:30 a.m. I'm like, what in the world could they possibly want? I'm in a complete cloud, having just been woken up from this deep sleep. And the cop goes, "Hey, go back inside, get dressed. You need to come with us." I mean, you can imagine the complete shock of hearing those words from 2 cops. You know, my mind starts racing. I'm thinking like, am I in trouble? Is my family okay? I'm like totally like freaking out. I get dressed, I race to the door, and the cops are in the car and they're waiting for me outside, you know, with the car running. And I get in the back seat and I'm like, it's so freaky, like being in the back seat of this NYPD car. And they start to tell me that my Plymouth Horizon was stolen. And I'm like, what? Just hearing those words were shocking because I thought like only nice cars get stolen. Like, no? I'm like, why this car? Like, it was an eyesore. Why would anybody want it? So we soon arrive at the police precinct from my area, which happened to be the 63rd precinct. And it's exactly how you would picture it on TV. Like this brick and cement fortress of a building, almost has like a library feel to it, you know? In the middle of this like residential block. And then you've got a couple of like dozen police cars, both parked on the street in front and then some on the sidewalk. You know, they just put them everywhere. And I think this was like the first time I'd ever stepped foot in an NYPD police station, so it was definitely bizarre. And I was taking it all in, and I was still in shock. It has this like certain smell, almost like pine sol. Then like the lighting is kind of depressing and dim. Like I said, just like on TV, you've got police officers working the graveyard shift, couple of talking, you know, to one another in the corner. One walks by with a coffee, then you've got a couple of detectives sitting at their desks, typing out reports. It's exactly like I said you would picture it in a movie or a TV show, except there's this shock of knowing that it's real and you're there for an actual reason. So I waited a few minutes and I was told that a detective would meet me in a couple of minutes. So soon after, I get called over to this detective's desk and he introduces himself. He says, "I'm Detective Romano," and I shake his hand. And he tells me that my car was retrieved about an hour ago. So apparently one of the people that lived on my street happened to be up late and they happened to see this suspicious looking dude hunched over in my car and he appeared to be searching through it. So they saw him drive away. They figured it might be stolen. And so the neighbor called 911 and the police ended up spotting the vehicle with the car thief behind the wheel. I mean, he was caught red-handed, and so they start questioning him, and eventually they place Mr. Theodore Williams under arrest for grand theft auto. Always remember the guy's name. So Detective Romano goes on to tell me that Mr. Williams was already being brought to Brooklyn Central Booking, which is all the way downtown, which is where they take all the suspects that they arrest. They get them booked into the system there. It's called BCB. Then he reaches into a drawer, this detective, he plops this thick file folder on the desk in front of me, and I'm wondering why he's pulling this all out. The next thing he says, he goes, "Now this is where your story starts getting much more complicated, Mr. Cruz." And as soon as he said those words, I could feel my stomach turn. So Detective Romano, he goes on to tell me, listen to this, that the car thief not only stole my car, but that he had a rap sheet a mile long. So he was a career criminal, this guy. And he had this long history of committing Class B felonies and various other crimes. This guy had it all, burglary in the first degree, assault in the first degree. He had criminal use of firearm, grand larceny, tampering with evidence, you name it, tampering with witnesses. The list went on and on. It was incredible. Then he continues to tell me that Mr. Williams had confessed to the arresting officers that he not only stole my car tonight, but that he'd been back on my street a bunch of times, possibly as many as 6 or 7 other times, took my car, committed armed robberies and various other crimes, used my car as a getaway vehicle. Then he would return my car to the same place where he'd stolen it, and then he'd be hoping to come back again and use it over and over. That was the plan, to keep using it. I was numb. By now, I felt like I was dreaming. And at least, I had this rush of knowing that I'm not losing my mind. But of course, it was sickening. It was disappointing to know that my car was being used for this. And I knew something wasn't right when I found my car in different places, but at least I was kind of vindicated at this point. And here I'm thinking that's the worst thing he's gonna tell me. And then his next words, that's what made my blood run cold. So Detective Romano then says, "Mr. Cruz, I'd like you to take a seat." And he pulls out the seat and he goes, "You're gonna want to be sitting down when I tell you this next part." I'm standing up at Detective Romano's desk and he's just dropping all this shocking news on me. And I just learned about the car thief's insanely long rap sheet and how this guy apparently used my car on numerous occasions to commit some heinous crimes. And I'm not even barely digesting that when the detective just says the most utterly shocking thing. He says, "Mr. Cruz, I'd like you to take a seat because you're gonna want to be sitting down when I tell you this next part." And at this point, I'm feeling my heart beating through my shirt. It's just going boom, 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 boom. And I'm feeling the sweat beating up around my neck and shoulders. You know that feeling when you're in shock? And I'm bracing myself for what he's about to tell me. And so I grab the chair and I'm almost in a daze. And I, pull it out next to his desk. I sit down. The detective proceeds to tell me that shortly after being placed under arrest, Mr. Williams had also confessed to the arresting officers that one night, approximately 2 weeks prior to this night, that he was inside my car and he had been trying to get the car's ignition to start, but he was having a bit of a hard time and he was jiggling it and turning it. It wasn't starting. And it was right about that point that he started seeing what he believed to be the car's owner walking down towards him down the street. And according to him, he was huddled down inside the car and the owner, me, was just several paces away from the car. And it was exactly at that point when he had pulled his gun out of his jacket and he was just ready to start shooting as I approached the car. And he says he was just about to pull the trigger, but suddenly he says that I turned around and walked away. And he says that I was approaching the car and he had made up his mind that he wasn't gonna get caught, that he was getting out of there and he was gonna start shooting. And he just made up his mind that if he had to kill, he was gonna do it that night. And it was at that moment, I remembered that one fateful night when I'd walked towards the car and I went outside to check it. And then I turned around at the last moment, I went back inside. That decision literally saved my life that night, and I had no idea. And so after that night, I learned to never take those small nudgings that you get, you know, those ones you feel, those small impressions inside, never take them for granted. If you get that strong feeling, like you just know that you know, I learned after that night, you should always listen to them. Because sometimes it's just not your intuition, it's God speaking to you and he's giving you a little warning. Sometimes he's giving you a little bit of inside information. Never ignore that voice.